it is that time again. This is The Law, live audio wrestling. I am Chris Tidwell, notorious T.I.D, and joining me each and every week is somebody new, somebody that I enjoy talking to, somebody that I think has great conversation, somebody who has an amazing story. And this person has probably one of the most amazing stories in all of professional wrestling, let alone the stuff that you see or you hear or anything like that on TV. The story of this man is absolutely insane. And without further ado, Mr. Gregory Irons, thank you so much for joining me tonight. How are you doing?
I'm great. I don't know if I can live up to all the hype you just put in front of me, but I'm going to do my best.
Well, I mean, that's what it's all about, right? We talk a good game. Isn't that the world of professional wrestling? It's up to the promoter to put it over, and then you got to come in and perform and go. Ha! Make me laugh, Greg.
I don't know what I got. I can't dance, and I'm sitting in a chair, and it's even worse. So yeah, that's it. That's all I got.
That's amazing, man. So how have you been? How's life been treating you up to this date?
Great. No complaints, man. Doing the best I've ever been. Just trying to stay busy with wrestling and my work schedule and my speaking stuff and Patreon stuff, and still doing a little bit of podcasting, kind of dipping my toes in all facets of pro wrestling. If I can avoid bumping, I would like to. And I'm making a little bit of money from that, so that's nice. And yeah, man, I'm doing better than I should.
This is exactly the way that it should be, in my opinion, because I started off doing this 1996 or whatever it was. I don't know. You do the math. I'm too old to figure it out anymore. And then I left that and pursued a career in professional wrestling for 26 years. And recently had my last match last December or whatever. And same thing, got back into it, doing all of this because you still have the knowledge. You still have the desire to talk about it. You still have a voice to be heard. But it's way easier than taking the bumps. Oh my God. And I'm a dude who's, a little bit more quote, air quotes, I'm going to throw them up there, built for the business.
Sure.
6'4", 280 pounds. You are not.
No, never was, never will be. But sometimes you have to take the tools that you have,
Right.
accentuate the positives, hide the negatives, and at the end of the day, you have to um, try to stand out. That's one of the goals of wrestling, right? Even if you're not the typical mold, but also you have to learn how to do things the right way. And then by doing so, you can apply them to your individual situation. And I think if you combine that with passion, if you have a true passion for professional wrestling in some way, you can make these things work for you.
Are you finding it more though, since being in wrestling? This is what I ask people all about, is that the things that you learn and the way that you kind of approach things in wrestling also transfers over to the way that you can kind of learn and approach things in your civilian life and vice versa. Right. And
Yeah.
I'm sure this is something that you've dealt with since you were in knee high to a grasshopper. I can only imagine, right? Having to deal with, shitty kids. Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what was it that like drew you to wrestling? Because I know what it was for me. It was like, it was a complete escape. It was Saturdays. I growing up in Las Vegas, getting to go to the showboat, to see AWA stuff, and then sitting in front of the TV watching that and the WTBS, Saturday afternoon fiascos. Like, what was it for you? Whose floor was it? You know what I mean? And how annoying was it to them?
Well, before I tell that story, I want to backtrack to what you were saying
Please.
about how you could apply wrestling to life. I feel like as a civilian,
Mm-hmm.
it's trial and error, right? And I think it's just kind of the same way with wrestling. And the older I've gotten, the more experience I've gotten in professional wrestling, the more I realize how many parallels between life and sports entertainment there are. And when I'm doing seminars, a lot of the times you can apply life circumstances, life situations to professional wrestling. I think the best example, just right off the top of my head, it's like when I'm explaining character building and a guy's trying to figure out who they are as a character. I say, sometimes you have an idea of what you want your character to be, and that's cool. But once you start learning the trade and getting out there and experiencing things, you will quickly realize perhaps maybe your character is much different than you thought it was going to be, or your wrestling style is going to be different than you thought it'd be. When I got into wrestling at the time, 2006, some of the guys that inspired me the most were like Kurt Angle, Chris Benoit, Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, Chris Jericho, very technical wrestlers, high flying wrestlers, Rey Mysterio. And I wanted to be like, particularly like Chris Benoit and Kurt Angle, like the submission specialist, right?
Sure.
And then real quick, you realize, wait a minute, I'm 5'4", I have cerebral palsy, one good functioning hand. That probably doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. But the point of this rambling is, it's like, we meet so many people in our lives, right? And whether the relationship is good or bad, these friendships, the relationships with our family members, we have to have these life experiences. And when we walk away from these experiences, it builds a layer onto who you are, right? And so when I'm talking to people about wrestling characters, it's like that's how you build your wrestling character. It's like sometimes you just have to go out there and perhaps maybe you don't know how to emote something that you can in real life. How do I make that into my wrestling character? Because I feel like if it's real to you, then it's real to the audience. Sometimes you have to interact with certain characters and wrestlers and be in certain circumstances that when you walk away from that, it builds a layer, whether good or bad, to who you are. And now you're able to show that particular trait to the audience in not only that situation, but in other situations. So wrestling in life, not too much difference there, right? You just got to figure it out. I'm done with that part of the rambling, but to go to where it all started,
Yeah.
my grandma loved wrestling.
Mhm.
It started with her loving Hulk Hogan, and she showed me WrestleMania 6, and so it all kind of started right there. Warrior and Hogan, the Ultimate Challenge, and it just kind of grew from there because I didn't have the best home life on top of having a disability. My parents were always at odds. My mom and dad were always physically and verbally fighting. And then, I go to school, I'm getting bullied for a disability that's out of my control. And so, it was an escape for me on Saturday mornings or Monday nights. And as I got older, Thursday nights, to get lost in these larger than life characters. And I didn't think I was going to be a wrestler, but I knew that there was something about wrestling that I wanted to be a part of it. I wanted to figure out how I could be a part of that. And as I got older and smarter to wrestling, I start to realize, well, there's wrestling magazines and there's storylines. Maybe I can write storylines one day, do some sort of production work. And, eventually I come across Zach Gowen, who wrestles with one leg. And it was the first time that I saw someone that I could identify with, that I could see myself in. And I think that's so important for any kid in anything that they're interested in. Like if there is any curiosity to try to get part of that, sometimes it doesn't seem realistic until you see someone that is sort of like you. And that's what I saw in Zach Gowen. So after I saw him do the moonsault to the big show and wrestle Vince McMahon on pay-per-view, I started thinking to myself, if this guy could do it with one leg, one missing leg, maybe I could do it with one bum arm. And that's when, I just started exploring those other options of, finding a wrestling school and getting the courage to step foot in that wrestling school. And sometimes, that's the hardest thing, is that first step, that fear of failure. You got to overcome that. And, I often say it doesn't get any easier than that, but, or it doesn't get any harder than that, but because you've already taken the hardest step, right? Like it's just taking that first step towards your dream, the dream that most people will only continue to dream about. You're actually trying and doing and failing sucks, but it is far less painful than living in regret. So
Do
that's
you
my
remember,
rambling.
do you remember that first bump that you took in the ring?
Yeah. Painful,
Yeah.
not understanding how to tuck my chin just yet because it is so incredibly unnatural. More so than those first bumps. I remember the second and third and fourth and fifth bump, because once I couldn't figure out how to do it properly, one of the guys that was helping at the time, my first couple weeks, was a guy by the name of Adam Cage, and he was doing the old run and sweep you type bump.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say he was taking liberties, but he might have, been purposely trying to sweep me a little little more than he should have. And so I'm repeatedly just being tripped on my head. And, it's my job to tuck my chin, but, this guy is just like actually taking me off my feet, but I kept getting up and doing and doing. So who knows how many concussions I had just in that first month of training.
There's way easier ways to go about training guys to do that stuff, man. I
Yeah.
remember I remember the first bump that I ever took. I thought, because I came from a world of like doing collegiate wrestling and doing, hop keto and fighting and rolling and throwing and all of that was fantastic. I was like, screw it. Yep, I got this. I got it. Boom, boom, weight disbursement, slap down as hard as you can, attack it as fast as you can, make sure that you go all the way through it, tuck your chin, breathe out, legs up to God. We got this. Let's go. Boom, jump straight up in the air as high as I can. I'm 6 foot fucking four, Greg. I can
Right.
jump, right? I jump as high as I can. I come all the way back down. I slap my hands down. I breathe out. I forget to tuck my chin, and then I'm getting woken up
Uh-huh.
because
Fun
I'm
times, man.
out cold, right? And then you're exactly right, because it's not that bump. That bump tests you as a man, as a human, as a you know what I mean? It tests your character. But it's
Yeah.
that one that you're like, okay, now let's get that right. Take that second one, take that third one, take that fourth one. And then the bigger one for me, anyways, I don't know what it was for you. The bigger one was coming back that second day. Like, you can get through that first one because you're like, you know what, I'm going to gut this through. Then you've got to go home and you've got to think about it. You've got to really say to yourself, is what I'm feeling right now worth it? Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I remember those first weeks of training, you know, walking up and down the stairs and like my back and my neck and everything just killing me, like brutal pain that I don't feel like I've felt since, because your body's getting used to that. I remember thinking, God, is this how it's going to feel all the time? Because if so, I'm not really interested in this. But for whatever reason, I think, you mentioned something about those first few bumps testing your will, seeing if you're a man. I think it really is seeing like, how psychotic are you? Are
100%.
like this is so painful, you moron. This is not natural to the human body. Most people, 90% of people that are to come to wrestling training are going to take those first few bumps and quit. Then some of that same 90% is going to take the bump once and quit. We took the time to decipher the pain,
Yeah.
understand that that's what's involved. And particularly when we broke in, I don't know what you thought, but, I read so many wrestling autobiographies. I thought to myself, because of what I read, at some point, an older guy while training is going to beat me up for real to see if I am tough enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I was prepared to face that. Like, how we're crazy. We're crazy people. And all that in consideration, I still went back twice a week, over and over and over and over again. What a bunch of weirdos. Pro
Right?
wrestling.
Yeah. And our excuse was why we didn't get into like boxing or something like that was because, I don't want to get hit in the face.
Yeah, don't hit me in the face. Let me just fall on my neck and back and concuss myself.
But let me walk into a venue and see if I can pick out the highest point and decide, where am I going to jump from tonight?
Dude, I say that all the time. I say to myself, if you told me right now, 9:30 at night while we record this, hey, Greg, go to the roof of your house and jump off. And I'd be like, no, you idiot. Like, why would I do something so insane? Like what?
Yeah.
And so then you put that same scenario in wrestling. If I'm working a match with someone, if someone's videotaping me, they say, hey, Greg, what do you think about jumping off the roof? I'm like, I got at least one person catching me, right? We're good.
Right.
Okay, let's go. What?
It's a wacky world, right? When you break it down.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And you came from kind of the tail end. If you started in 2006, that was kind of the tail end of like that early 2000s ECW kind of mayhem era, right?
Yeah. I was really in that transitional period.
And I know there's a tie with you and Josh Prohibition, right?
Yeah.
Obviously. Was that ever something that was weighed in? Because I know Josh caught a lot of heat for like the backyard stuff that him and Matt were doing,
Yeah.
all the way back then. Was that ever something that like transferred down, you know what I mean, to you guys that were training under him?
No, no, I think at that point, Josh and Matt had, at least from what I could see, had really started to earn the respect because at the time I think M Dog had just started working Ring of Honor. Josh had done a lot of stuff, like the usual indie places at the time, like CZW and XPW. But he had a really big following up in Canada for UWA Hardcore. He was like the champion. He had so many crazy good like technical matches, and it's so funny because like knowing these guys better now, M Dog is the crazy athletic one, but he's not crazy about wrestling. And Josh, he's always been the big wrestling fan, and he doesn't have the high flying abilities that the M Dog does, but he had the promo and he had the passion for wrestling like no other. So it's like, it's funny how, Josh is only kind of doing it once in a while now. Which that in itself is crazy because it's over 20 years at this point.
Right.
And M Dog still, at 42 years old, still on the road every weekend, just going crazy. And Josh is okay with like settling down and taking care of his family. But I always thought Josh was incredibly underrated. And I think at that point, I think Matt and Josh were really gaining people's respect a lot more.
It's funny because I used to go and I knew the UWA guys, and the reputation that they had at the time amongst a lot of the other older, I guess, because Ontario and Canada was in this really weird stage back then where like there was a commission that would charge you to have a license $75, and it didn't matter. You just had to fill out a form and send it in. And then they would charge you for promotions. They would charge you depending on the size of the town that you were running in. That's how much you paid a flat fee plus your gate tax, depending on how, and nobody paid attention. So you'd have a couple of people running these outlaw shows and whatnot, right? And then these kids come along, these two kids from, just north of Toronto, right? Osiris and his brother, right? Come along and they've got money. And they build this thing and create this thing that came out of nowhere, and it pissed off a lot of people in the wrestling community.
Oh, I'm sure.
Myself fucking included. Absolutely. Yeah. And I can remember going to one of these shows, and I went there. I paid my money for a ticket. I wasn't there to big time or fucking be that guy or anything like that. Paid my ticket and I watched, and I was like, wow. These kids are very enthusiastic.
Yeah.
Very enthusiastic. And some of them are going to do fantastic things, but oh my God, I have to leave.
You know
what I mean?
Yeah, I get it. But it's funny because like, I think I don't know if it's that perception so much now because of, years have gone on or whatever, but like, I just feel like, backyard wrestling, for all the bad that it seemingly created in the 90s and 2000, like a lot of good came out of backyard wrestling because like these kids, like you always see like the negative side of it from back in the day, but like a lot of these dudes ran really professional shows, sometimes more professional than the ones that were actually bringing the names at the time, and had like, to this day, which pisses me off, and I'm sure it's the same in your area, and like the 40 miler hanger-ons, right? Like the guys that got booked on shows during the Attitude Era, during the Monday Night War, when wrestling was over and you just put pro wrestling on the marquee, even though your show sucks dick, people came out because it said pro wrestling, and this shitbag just happened to be on the show. And now these guys who, by the time I was 2 years in, I had many more matches than they had at 10 years or whatever they were working. They're still around to this day, right? Like trying to throw around their veteran BS and like haven't changed with the times. And it's funny because like so many great backyard wrestlers became great pro wrestlers and were incredibly innovative, like just obviously the Bucks are probably at the top of that list right now, but like back in the day, the Hardys came from the backyard, like guys that I'm close to, like Ricky Shane Page came from the backyard. There's a whole slew of guys like Mark Andrews and Pete Dunne You know, they
Yeah.
were backyard kids from England. So it's like really, really crazy. Like if you really dig deep into it, backyard wrestling might have did more good than harm.
I think it was the thing where like it was a societal change too. The people
Yeah.
that were getting into wrestling weren't like there was a lot more when backyard wrestling was doing its thing. Let's be honest, there was a lot more fanboys that was their way. That was their way of being a part of it. And they
Sure.
created this community, their own community, right? And
Hmm.
grew and thrived and came out of that. And of course, just like with anybody who went through wrestling the other way, the quote traditional way, I went and trained at the Hearts Dungeon, and or I went and you know what I mean? Like any of
Yeah.
the guys that did that kind of stuff, that didn't mean that they wanted any less. Some of the guys that came from that backyard era probably understood it a lot more because the business had been opened up enough to them where you understand physics, you understand yourself, when you get in there, what you're capable of doing and what you can't do. But then you're like, you know what? I'm really acrobatic and I can do
Yeah.
this kind of a thing. And I understand story a bit and I understand psychology a bit. But I have this group of friends and then we elevated everybody. So like I get it. I get it. But just like in the world of professional wrestling, yeah, there was a time where it was like, even now, even now, you see guys that are coming up, these young quote young kids that are coming up, and you're like, whoa, hold on a second, kid, why are you moving so fast, why are you
Yeah.
bumping so hard, why are you doing
Mhm.
so much crazy shit out there? And
Yeah.
that was the same thing because everybody was used to that different style outside of ECW. Everybody was used to that WWE character driven style, and
Yeah.
along come this these guys are creeping from out of the backyard, and that was always a taboo, a no-no, right? But nowadays I think you're seeing a lot of guys who are a lot better than some of the guys that I see that come through the traditional schools. What do you think?
1000%. And the athleticism has grown so much, but at the
Yeah.
end of the day, as cool the moves as we're seeing, I think some guys it gets lost on them that wrestling at its core is still based off of emotional investment, right? And there's some guys that could do incredibly athletic things that did come to the backyard that I like as people, but also I could care less about what they're doing in the ring because like I don't have like that emotional connection and I don't know, it's strange as I get deeper into like just interested in like discussing wrestling and being creative with wrestling behind the scenes. um the bigger of a fan I'm becoming while watching what's happening on screen. I feel like we're in like a new golden era of professional wrestling with what we're seeing on television. And like I never thought that I could feel so much like a fan again because when you get into wrestling, I think you become kind of jaded. But like, man, my last year and a half, my eyes have been glued to the screen, and it's nice to see my friends be a part of that too. But like, it's nice to also see my friends and like get lost in the characters and the story and like almost being emotional. Like for example, when Sami Zayn like hit Roman Reigns with the chair at the Rumble last year and did that turn. And Jay Uso was like, I thought you were supposed to be my brother, man. He's about to cry, and I'm about to cry. And I'm thinking to myself, like, what? I know Sammy. You know what I mean? Like, I used to work Chikara with him all the time. Like, and I'm like borderline going to cry over this wrestling storyline. And I'm like a 36-year-old man, and I'm in the business. Like, what's going on here? That's magic, man. That's the magic of wrestling. I don't even know how we got to this, but this is what I do. I ramble.
But that's what got you into the business in the first place,
Yes.
right? It
Yes.
was that emotional. Do you remember, was there a moment, everybody talks about like that key moment as a kid that was like, boom, I'm hooked. I know what it was for me. I was watching AWA, and it was as cliche as it sounds for me as well. It was a Jimmy Superfly Snuka moment. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? He just seems to be the guy that got everybody hooked for some reason.
Yeah.
But for me, he was in a program in AWA with Colonel De Beers, and they were running this, and it was bloody. And at one point, Snook is out there working somebody. I don't even remember who it was, but De Beers comes out, and I was at the show, just a couple rows back. De Beers comes out, jumps Snuka, pulls back the padding on the outside of the ring, and just plants him face first. And Snuka does the old fucking gimmick, and they come in with the ambulance and they haul him off, and they drove, like, they left the arena because people chased the ambulance, and they took him to Sunrise Hospital in Las Vegas, Nevada, and they ran
Yeah.
the whole thing with this deal. And I'm sitting there just looking at everybody in the crowd, and the command of that crowd that moment had. It was like
Yeah.
there was women crying, at
Yeah.
this. But what did you think was going to happen when you went to this violent display? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Sure.
and now when you watch wrestling again, just like that had to be that bloodline, storyline had to be one of the biggest things going, like,
Yeah.
for the longest time. And I think, for me personally, I think that that's when you saw Sammy really shine, saw him shine the best with his acting. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
With his storyline telling was absolutely spot on. And
Yeah.
and wrestling is doing it all over again right now, because everybody, even us, we're gonna, mention the fact, right, that all of this stuff with CM Punk coming back just goes to show that you can get people invested so easily if you know exactly how to pull their strings in
Yeah.
professional wrestling, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You yourself, if I was a heel right now, I'd say a bit of a dick move. You kind of born yourself into a babyface gimmick,
Right.
right out the gate. But there had to be some times, like, did you start off as a baby?
Yeah, but it's funny because when I started training, I didn't know if I would be a good guy or a bad guy because I was so used to being bullied. And even though I saw Zach Gowen and what that did on television as a babyface character, my mindset was like, well, what if they boo me because I have a weird hand? Like, what if I have to be a bad guy? I think I worked a couple shows as a bad guy early on, but I didn't know how to be a bad guy just yet. But this goes back to earlier when I was talking about interacting with certain characters and building layers to who you are. And eventually, it probably took about 5 years for me to become a bad guy on the regular. And as soon as it was pitched and I heard people doubting that I could be a bad guy, in my brain, I was like, you're gonna doubt me. I'm gonna prove you wrong each and every time. And I already made up my mind that, back when I was in middle school and I started to find myself and my sense of humor, um, my smart ass attitude, kids would make fun of me, and to try to deflect that, I would make fun of myself better. But then throw it back at the bully, like, oh, by the way, while you're making fun of my supposed disability, you fat cross-eyed freak, here's what your disabilities. And so I kept that in mind when I was going to be a bad guy. Like, I have to take everything that is good about the character and just make him an asshole to where when the fans walk away from the show, they go, you know what? Like, I know he's disabled, but I think Gregory Iron is actually an asshole. Like, screw that guy. And so that was the mindset. It was like, I had the success after my thing with CM Punk in Chicago. He ends up coming out with Cabana, publicly endorsing me the week that he wins the WWE Championship at Money in the Bank. And so that kind of went viral. And my hometown crowd starts booing me like in the months that follow, just because it was like a small section that thought they were smarter than everybody, like, we're sick of Gregory Iron, this good guy crap. And so I was like, well, I'm going to flip it on them, and that's exactly what I did. Like, you look at me like I'm disabled, well, you're far more disabled than I'll ever be. You're delusional, and I leave Cleveland and I find success, and now you hate me because of it. Well, I'm going to prove you guys all wrong, and then I am a success, and then I can be better than you'll ever be. And yeah. I feel like I'm a better bad guy than a good guy. It
Why
defies logic, but yeah.
why is it always when I leave this town? It always seems to be. And so when I leave this town that I've been living in and part of and born and bred here my
Yeah.
entire, but when I leave, I'm going to be so much better than all of you.
Well, you know what? But it goes back to like again, at its core, like you have to say that because again, this small circle of fans in the
Right.
crowd are booing me because I'm being successful. And when you start out in wrestling, you know how it goes. It's like, people are like patting you on the back, like, oh boy, like you got to work hard so you can get success. But then you start finding success. But then going back to those 40 milers earlier, they're all behind your back going like, well, fuck this kid for getting these bookings and he thinks he's a big shot. Mind you, like you're not really saying or doing anything that's making you perceive as a big shot. You're just losing money traveling into these shows, trying to garner some sort of success so that maybe potentially you can make a little bit more money on the smaller shows. That's kind of how it works. And then everybody like is just the same people that were rooting you on are now against you. And I think that's somehow, on the independent wrestling fans mindset, it's like, you know, indie wrestling is kind of like, that small punk rock band that you're into. And then they get signed to the label and then they start experimenting with different sounds. And, they're not as cool anymore because you love that punk rock band before anybody knew who they were. And this is how they were originally. And now, like, point of the rambling is it's like they want to go against the grain. And so you want to go against the grain, want me to throw it back in your face and you want to boo me? I'll give you a reason to boo me. That's
Well,
what it's
listen,
all about.
Bad Religion stayed the same consistency all the way through, right?
That is true.
No matter how popular they got, right? And so did the
Mm-hmm.
Descendants. So, but
True.
listen, there's a guy, and I'm gonna blow a little bit of smoke up his ass right now from Ontario who embodies all of that kind of stuff. And I tell guys all the time, put your shoes on, get out on the road, go travel. You're not going to do anything here. You're going to hit a certain ceiling and then that's going to be it. You're going to only learn so much inside of a school, right? But really you've got to learn by being out on the road. And a guy that took it to that level and really, really did well for himself doing that is Ethan Page. You know what I mean? Absolutely did it. Started his own promotion. I mean, ask Ethan who trained him or whatever. Not really anybody. Did his own thing.
Yep.
I mean, listen, kudos to him for having the foresight and the fortitude to just go out there and be like, screw you guys. I'm going to absolutely do it. And I think that you see a lot more of that more often, it seems like nowadays with students.
Sure.
When you're trying to, and there's a guy who's developed this character, but not really a character. It's more like just like you said, another layer to, all egg Ethan Page, as I used to call him all the time, because it just looked like all egg on his ass all the time. Right.
Sure.
But it's just another layer. And he's just gotten so good now. Right. Do you have, when you're writing stuff and you say that you want to get more into, the creative end of stuff, right? And you're not obviously creating stuff for yourself, but is there anybody right now that you're, creating for and writing for that gets you really excited?
So I'm not writing for anybody particularly, but so I've, without letting the cat out of the bag too much, I've had a couple of opportunities to write some potential stories for potential jobs. And what I'm enjoying in this, and back in the day before I even started typing out stories and stuff, I had the opportunity when I was younger, and we kept it secret because I didn't want to get heat from the older guys that I was helping write the TV show. There was a show in Ohio called Pro Wrestling Ohio, and it became Prime Wrestling. Johnny Gargano, his stepdad, had a hand in running it. So, and again, it all goes back to jealousy. Everybody back then was like, "Oh, Johnny Gargano was only over because his stepdad runs the promotion." Now he's in WWE, killing it. Yeah. Did his stepdad get him that job? I don't think that's how that worked, but we had a hand in writing the stories back then, and there's a lot of unmet potential with the TV show, mostly because of budgets and because of Johnny's stepdad being kind of a moron sometimes when it comes to, again, that indie promoter mindset of like stupid stuff like sidebar here. Like I remember one time being in the back, it was me, Gargano, Joe Dombrowski writing television. And Joe, of course, he's doing so much in commentary and stuff now these days. And the promoter would go above our heads sometimes and do stuff that we did not write. So one time we're sitting in the back and we're talking, and then it's the end of the show, and we hear the ring announcer go, and make sure to come back next month for the debut of the mysterious Wrestler X. And I remember looking at Gargano being like,
Yep.
who's Wrestler X? And so then after the show, me and Gargano go up to his stepdad and go, what was this announcement about Wrestler X? Like, well, that sponsor that pays for advertisement from the heating and cooling company? And we go, yeah. He goes, well, he wants to come back and wrestle next month in a handicap match and do what he's calling souffles to the wrestler. And I said, suplexes? Like, is he like trying to say it like Gordon Soley or something? Like, what's going on here? And long story short, too late, this dude came to one training session, and we purposely made him take bumps because we're like, well, you can't wrestle unless you could take bump. And he was like a 40-ish-year-old man. And go figure, he takes one bump and he goes, oh, that hurts. Like, no shit, Sherlock. Like, this is what we do every week. Like, you're not just going to beat up a couple of students. And the match never happened. But so what I've always loved about creating stories and doing it now more than ever, especially with more knowledge under my belt, is there's only so much I could do with my character, right? But writing for other people allows you to step in anybody's shoes. And, if you can kind of take the time to understand that character and think about what would they do in this situation? What would they do in this situation? And take from other things, other works of art, other movies and television shows, borrow from those to create something where you can paint a beautiful picture within professional wrestling. For my mental sanity, especially now over the past few years, like doing more creating, what I really enjoy about it is watching other stuff. I used to be so dialed into just wrestling that it was consuming me. And, as we learn to more about ourselves as a human as we get older, you realize that is not healthy to just be wrestling all the time, every second of your life. And it ruins not only relationships you have with other people, but your relationship with yourself. And so over the past few years, growing, changing, and reminding myself like, oh yeah, like I like this thing over here or this thing over here. And actually taking pieces of those other things that I enjoy, I can now incorporate that into wrestling. And now my wrestling is better. Like my wrestling mind is better because I'm not just so lost in the sauce of everything being pro wrestling 24/7. And so like just the point of this rambling is like for my mental sanity, being more multifaceted has not only bettered my life outside of wrestling, but has made the creating within wrestling so much better. And I don't know, like I think that is really the second chapter of my career is creating behind the scenes, and I'm okay with that. I think sometimes people have too much of an ego and they want to be in front of the camera, and I have so many people that want to wrestle. Particularly in my case, a lot of people with disabilities who come to me and say, "Oh, I want to be a wrestler, but I don't know if I could do it." And I try to tell them like, keep in mind that if you can't do it physically to where it's believable, if you're passionate enough about it, you could find a way to make it work. And I'd like to think that if I didn't become a performer in the ring, I would have still taken the time to learn in a school the proper way to do it, and then mentally convey that creativity into some other form of professional wrestling. So you can't quit if you're passionate about it, right? You just got to find a way, find an excuse, or you find a way to make it work.
Here's the question: when you say you have enough people, with disability that want to do it, do you have enough for a roster?
A roster of disabled people?
That's what I'm like. I don't know. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask the question for all the promoters out there, for all the Whipper Watsons in the world. Do you have enough to put a team together?
You know what? If you don't count physical disabilities, I think that there probably would be enough.
Geez, you could go to any locker room anywhere and find enough of us with mental disabilities.
We're all mentally disabled somehow, but I don't know if there's there's probably a solid roster out there. I mean, you almost have to do a talent search, but I've met over my years of travel, I've met other wrestlers with cerebral palsy. I've met deaf wrestlers. I've met blind wrestlers.
Yeah.
It's amazing, what some of these individuals can do and do it safely, and they know their limitations. I have come across some that do not know their limitations, but it's also because no one has taken the time to say, hey, like, what you're doing is not believable. And like, that's not like, it's not any disrespect, right? Like, as performers, um, whether you have some sort of mental condition or physical condition, or you're just some normal Joe Schmo, like if you get in the ring and it looks bad, like, there's two things. You either find out the things that you could do good, which I had to do, which there are a lot of things that I did poorly
Mhm.
training with Johnny Gargano and Josh Prohibition that I had to come to terms with and be like, I can't come to training with 3 new moves every week that suck to try to keep up with Gargano. I need to stick to what I'm good at and then find like transitions and like storytelling devices so that I could create the illusion that I am a better physical wrestler than what I am. If you cannot do it physically, you got to find a way to do the limited things that you can do physically, make it work, or do something behind the scenes. Because one of the guys that I saw with a disability before I started wrestling with cerebral palsy, his name is Dan Edge. He wrestled in the UK, and I think it's still on YouTube. There was a match with him and Corey Graves when he was Sterling James Keenan, and
Mhm.
they're wrestling in United Kingdom somewhere. I think it's for 1PW, and Sterling whips him into the ropes, and because he has CP bad in his legs, this dude is like running in a very not believable way to where, as someone with CP watching it, it was uncomfortable for me. And when we're creating this magic that is professional wrestling, we have to make the illogical logical. And in that moment, I was just taken out of it because I was like, God, I feel bad for this guy, but not in the way that I should. Not because Sterling James Keenan was beating him up, but because he's just in a situation that he is not meant to be in, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. If you can't, if you, not everybody gets the De Niro role, and there's a reason for it. If you don't have the ability to be that character, that doesn't mean that there isn't a spot for you in the business,
For
because
sure.
there's so many things to do inside of the business. And I think that
Yes,
that's what it was a lot of the times before, back in the day, was there was all of this stuff still to do in the business, but it was only being done by a very small handful of people. There
yeah,
was also only a very small handful of companies. But now there's so many different companies out there. There's so many different facets for people to make a living, not just as performers, but as people working in the office, as people in the writing, as people, the producers, as the agents, whatever the fuck we're calling them nowadays.
yeah,
There's room for a lot more people, and you have the ability to draw from these people's minds. More importantly, you know what I
for
mean?
sure. Yeah,
um I think that's the biggest thing that I'm excited about pro wrestling, because I have, since being away from it, being on that every week, every weekend, on the road, every, the training that I've broken my neck, doing all of this. I've had a double compound fracture in my left, tibia and fibula, that held me back
mm,
for on the shelf for a long enough time, but
sure.
you get very, very jaded with the business. There's no doubt about it. And I see that, like, nowadays there's a lot of kids out there that are, and I call them kids, there's a lot of kids out there that are very passionate about the stuff that they're doing. You know what I mean? And thankfully, thankfully, we get to see it happen before our eyes.
Yeah.
Are are you still taking bookings? Right.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I'm
there's
still taking bookings. I'm still taking bookings. But I'm picking and choosing. You know what I mean? Like, I uh I want to make money because it's a business, but I also want
right.
to have fun. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, I don't need to be out there every weekend, which is the great thing about spreading myself out with other things, like things that I never imagined could come from wrestling. Um, to monetize, like I'm monetizing, like having speaking engagements where I get paid much more than wrestling,
And I'm
to
seeing
go
this a
out.
lot more. I'm seeing this a lot more
Yeah.
with wrestlers too. Like, my friend Cody Deaner does
Yes.
a number of these things. You know what I
Yes.
mean? And
Yes.
he's doing a fantastic job. I love Cody to death. And there seems to be a lot more acceptance. Is that what it is? You know what I mean
Yeah.
about professional wrestling? But like, don't get it twisted. Nobody was bringing Meng to their school class, you know what I mean, to talk about the dangers of drugs. You know
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
I
Sure, sure.
mean?
But you know what? Like I feel like now that the business is more open, and I think we're more receptive to the idea that it's entertainment and that there's a story behind the story. I think that's encouraging to kids. And in my situation, I think it's one of those things where it's like it's speaking at schools um, has been the only thing that I find as fulfilling as wrestling. And never in my life that I think I'd find something that makes me feel that way. But much like wrestling, there's a lot of talking involved, and you get that instant feedback, and it's so awesome to be that person that I wish would have came to my school when I was a kid to tell me like, hey, you know, it might seem dark right now, whether, it's something happening at school or something at home, but I promise you, if you
Sure.
keep going, if you keep moving forward, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It might take you a little bit longer than you'd like to get there, but you got to keep moving and you got to keep pushing towards the things that you really, really want in life. And sometimes in doing that, you'll find other things that you didn't realize you wanted, like becoming a professional wrestler to rub it in people's faces that told you you couldn't do it. And then all of a sudden you're speaking in front of, five, six, 1,000, 1,500 kids or adults with developmental disabilities and sharing your story and making a difference in their life. Um, that's something I could have never imagined. Creating a podcast because I sat on Stone Cold Steve Austin's podcast and Stone Cold told me, hey, kid, do you ever think about starting a podcast? And I was like, no, everybody has a podcast. And then I did it anyways. And then, I create this community of 100-ish people that are on my Patreon that are now friends all over the world. And, you have a couple thousand listeners every week listening to the show. It's humbling, and there's money to be made in those things if you take time, you take the effort, and you're consistent with it. You know what I mean? So like I have these other things happening where it's like, if a promoter's going to be a dickhead, and like I'll give you a perfect example. I'm not going to name names or anything, but there's back in the summer, someone contacted me about a show, and it required a flight. They got me a flight, and then I was going to go see a friend in this state while I was there, stay with them anyways. So I was like, well, I haven't seen this friend in a while, an older wrestler. I'll hang out with him. But if I need it, I want to see where I'm staying in a hotel. And so I contact the promoter and I go, hey, what hotel am I staying at? And they go, well, we never discussed that. So then when that happened in my brain, I was like, strike one. And I was like, that's fine. Like, you know what? In my brain, I was like, I got somewhere to go. I don't really need a hotel. It'll save this dude a couple bucks. And then I got my flight information like 2 days beforehand, and I noticed like my bags were not taken care of, right? And I don't want to seem like a prima donna when I'm saying this, but like, in any other job, like if my job, my week job was going to send me on the road somewhere, my travel would be covered, right? Like
Yeah.
that, no questions asked, like it's going to be taken care of. So my bag is not bought for my flight. And I swear to you, Chris, I said to myself, I'm going to message this guy and ask him if he's covering my bag. And if he's not, I'm just not going to get on the flight and I'm not going to go because I'm not dealing with this shit. Like it's just like I don't need the headache. And so I messaged the guy and I had already made up my mind like I'm going to have to just not go to the show. And he's like, "Oh, yeah, I'll send you the money right now. I'll PayPal you. What's your PayPal?" And I was like, "Boy, you are lucky."
Wow.
Because you know what? Because like I just like
Yeah.
I don't need that the headache. And it's like um the reason why I started taking a break over last year was as we're recording this tomorrow, it's been 1 year since my dad passed away. Um, we had a very weird relationship, very back and forth, up and down. And he got sick with cancer really bad. And so I started helping him with my brothers with that. And it's one of the most difficult things I had to do. And losing him, when you lose someone like that, even if you have, a volatile relationship with them, it changes you, right? And so, um, physically, there have been times where, I probably took like 4 months off after he passed last December, and like physically, it didn't feel like it was in my heart. And sometimes when I go out there, um, I got a lot of anxiety now that I didn't have before. And it's like if I'm going to a show where I'm wrestling a guy where I have a feeling he's not going to be so good, I think to myself, oh God, I got to wrestle this guy that might hurt me or kind of sucks, and I want to make a good match. And then if I'm wrestling someone that's good, I go into it with a different anxiety of like, oh no, now I have the pressure of having to have a good match. Like, am I able to have a good match? Like, I don't freaking know. And then I go and do it, and 9 times out of 10, everything turns out okay. But it's like, personal loss changes you, and it changes you for the worst sometimes, but also you got to take the positives out of that situation too. If you change your perspective, the world shifts around you. And um as much as it sucks to lose a parent, um over the last year, it's allowed me to focus on other things in my life and better those things. My relationship with my two brothers had been strained for a long time. It's allowed me to be closer with my brothers than I've been in a long time. um every cliche, everything happens for a reason, right? You just got to take the time to find those reasons and create reasons to keep going. So like, that, all that being said, like, last weekend I was in Canada and I wrestled Del Bruno for the first time ever, singles match. And like, man, he's so freaking good, dude. Like, and it was one of those moments where it was like, this is why I keep wrestling. You know what I mean? Like, for moments like this, to create something artistically fun for us and for the audience. And then afterwards, I was asked by the promoter of Top Tier to stay over, and I wanted to get home, but then he told me it was because he wanted me to meet with a couple kids with disabilities and do an interview with one of them. I was like, no problem. And I'm interacting with this kid with CP, and he had very spastic cerebral palsy, and he couldn't be verbal. But I know from my personal experience working with people with disabilities that even though sometimes they can't convey what they're feeling,
Right.
they could still hear. You could see it in their eyes, and they still understand what you're saying. And I just had a discussion with this kid, and just his reactions to all of it. It was hard to control my emotions, and it's like, this is why I'm a wrestler. Every time I feel like I have one foot out the door, I have matches and moments like that to just make me realize that, like, we look in the mirror and we're just us, right? But sometimes you got to step outside of yourself and realize, you know, and this is not even like a wrestling thing here. Like, sometimes when we feel at our lowest, you know, maybe we don't want to be on this planet anymore. But then we have to take the time to think about, you know, the impact we have on other people's. And if we weren't around, if we weren't doing the things that we're doing, how that would affect others. And we're more important than we realize. And we got to keep doing the things that not only make us happy, but can help others keep moving forward.
Yeah, that is probably the most adult thing you could say. It's absolutely 100% true, but it's not something that you learn until you're older in life and you've experienced those things that put that all into perspective for you. That's the
Yeah.
absolute truth. We don't listen to it when we're younger and it's told to us because
No.
we absolutely have to go through it.
Yeah.
I've got one more for you here, and I want to get this before we wrap this up. And thank you so much again for doing all of this. We're going to do more of these because talking to you is just a treat for me.
Yeah. This is fun, man.
You talk about meeting those kids, and you talk about doing this the the talking spots and the speaking roles. But when you wrestle, what's the line? You know what I mean? Because I've always said for myself, anyways, when I'm in the back and people are cutting a promo or whatever, right? And inside of the world of wrestling, I'm like, I don't care what you say. Like, you can say whatever you want about me out there, because in my mind, all of this is bullshit. This is
Yeah.
all bullshit, right?
Yeah.
But there has to be, and if you go out there and you do these public speaking roles now, there has to be somewhere in your mind, I would think, you know, what message do you convey to some of these kids out there that, like, listen, this is not giving you an open door policy to become a bully at your school when you come to one of these shows and see one of these things. I don't understand it because I don't do any, public speaking positions or roles or anything like that. But so I don't get it. So that's why it's intriguing to me. How hard is it? How difficult is it for you to still be able to portray that you have to be a good person in life, but then I'm going to go work on this show that you're going to come to, and you're going to hear this guy that I've given the green light to say some really fucking nasty things.
Yeah. Well, I think at the end of the day, you have to, if they don't already know, you have to help these kids understand that, like, we're telling stories, right? It's no different than, any book you read or a movie you're watching or a TV show. Most of these programs, especially now with like TV shows, like they're so multi-layered, and like there's, shades of gray, and like good guys could be bad guys and bad guys could be good guys based on their actions. Like, I think, television movies over the last few years have really smartened people up, and I think we all think a little bit deeper than we care to admit. And at the end of the day, wrestling is this weird thing where we are pretend, but then, people get up in arms about certain things we do because it's wrestling and it's real, but it's not real. So it's like, where do you draw the line, right? But at the end of the day, you just got to let these kids know that we are telling stories. And if I'm the good guy underdog and I am being bullied by someone, like, and I gave him the green lights because, in the end, there's got to be a lesson out of this. Even if in the end I lose, the idea is, you're going to take losses in life, right? And it's how you deal with those losses. And, I think Rocky Balboa said it, you got to take the punches and keep moving forward, right? And I've said that a lot here. It's like, keep moving forward, because, like, you got to be transparent with these kids because they're smarter than they're probably given credit for. And, you know, it's not all sunshines and rainbows. And, we could stand until we're blue in the face and talk about, don't bully others, and, ignore the bullying, and, keep pushing towards that light at the end of the tunnel. But there's so many variables happening around us to try to bring us down, right? And I could say, don't bully others or don't be a bully. It's still going to happen, right? But again, it's all about perspective and how you handle these individual situations. And so when I'm out there as a performer and I'm telling these stories, take what you can out of the situation. Even if wrestling's not your thing, just understand, like, this is my way of trying to help people through the good that I do in these stories, the bad that I do. Even, someone with a disability can be a bad person and they need to learn a life lesson from it. And, it's at the end of the day, it's like, you just want these kids to have the best opportunities at life that they can. And if we can tell them stories through wrestling and they can learn something from it, then that's really what it's all about. And as far as the line goes, if we're not talking in terms of kids, like, I personally don't think there should be a line. I'm not offended by anything, for the most part, but other people are offended. And so you have to be cautious about what you're doing. Like, I'll give you a real perfect example here. Like, when I started to realize that there needed to be boundaries is a few years back. I used to do a spot all the time where a guy would make fun of my hand. So he would do this thing, right? And that was a thing that when I was a kid, profoundly hurt me when kids would do that in school, like this shit. And so, the spot was, I told the guy, like, hey, mock my hand, out wrestle me, and just keep doing this, right? And then the spot is eventually, he shoots me off out of a headlock. I hold on the ropes. He drops down. And when he drops down, I stomp his hand. So then he gets up and he's selling his hand like this, and he does a 360 or a 180, and he turns around, and then he's looking at me, and then I hold my hand like, oh, I'm mocking him, and then he realizes what's happening, and then he throws a shot at me, and I duck it, and I start firing off on him. So then a parent came up to me after, and not maybe understanding how wrestling works, she goes, "You're great, but that guy you're wrestling, I can't believe that he would do what he was doing as someone that is a parent of someone with a disability. Like, I hate that I had to see something like that." And I'm thinking to myself, oh boy, she doesn't know that I told this guy, hey, please make fun of my hand. So you got to know what's going to affect other people. And you do have to draw some sort of lines. But again, at the end of the day, we're telling stories, and you just got to, there's other way to tell that same story without doing the hand thing, right?
Well, I'll tell you right now, the correct answer, Gregory Iron, is that if you want to find out Mr. and Mrs. with your child, you're going to have to keep coming back until we do this thing called a blow off.
Yes.
And secondly, Rocky Balboa was a piece of shit. He used to go around breaking people's knees before he got a chance to be a boxer. Let's not forget what a horrible human he was.
He didn't want to do that though.
Right. He just did it for the money, right? I think there's another profession that's just as bad for that stuff. It's called professional wrestling.
You go back and watch Rocky 1, okay? And you think about all the times in that where he was like questioning, what am I doing? I don't want to be this bad guy. And then you tell me with a straight face that your heart doesn't melt when him and Adrian are in the hockey rink and they're having that moment. He's kind of a dork and she's kind of a dork, and they just
I can't.
Don't disrespect Rocky, man.
I can't,
come on.
It's Philadelphia. I can't. And I mean, I'm an Eagles guy through and through. So,
all right. You make a good point. That's fine.
Gregory, I want to thank you so much for joining me here. Let's do this again very soon. I wish you all the best in the future. If people want to get a hold of you just to send you unsolicited pictures and money, where can they do that?
You can find me on social media. I'm on X, as the kids say, at Gregory Iron. I'm not very active on there because it kind of sucks and it's a cesspool. But if I have to promote stuff, I'll go on there. It's easier to find me on Instagram at Gregory_Iron, or find me on Facebook at facebook.com/The Handicap Hero. And you could DM me on any of those platforms for pro wrestling seminars and/or motivational speaking. And I'll get back to you as soon as possible.
You heard it right there, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much. We'll be right back. This is the Law of Live Audio Wrestling. Don't go anywhere.